This computer. Hello, everybody. We're back with Bridget Nielsen, who is amazing. I'm so happy to see her again. Hi, Bridget.
Hi, Dan. Always so great having these conversations with you.
I talked to Bridget briefly the other day, and she really had even more twinkle in her eye, it seemed, because she was just back from, was it Ireland?
Ireland.
Ireland, the Eyrie-land, the nest for eagles, the Eyrie. And Bridget had reconnected with some very interesting ancestor memory and has a story to tell.
I do. Yes.
And a little background here. So Bridget and I have been working on this idea, mostly Bridget, really, about
No, I have to give you credit here. You've been prompting all of these things. Like we'll have these conversations and those that have been following along, which a lot of people have, will be I'll like be given kind of like a task, or like an invitation by you. And then all of a sudden like spirit brings it forward within like a few months. And so that's why all this is coming through is really because of these conversations and you
it's like
catalyzing them.
find the memory, find the memory,
Yes,
find the
yeah,
memory.
yeah. I'm like, all right, Dan, okay, I'm gonna go see what happens.
So Bridget had shown us, as an example, that she could locate a lineage of ancestor memory involving both her raising with the Mormon tradition and the fact that the Mormons had karma with the other part of her own ancestries, which was it the Ute? Um,
Yeah, the
yeah,
Ute natives.
yes, and that karma, there was some genocide between the Mormons and the Utes, and to heal that memory, she had to go back to both sides of the family line and feel the big picture, which I call inhabiting the array. And another piece of that puzzle was Bridget had perceived, as Bridget's been doing therapy in some ways with SSP experiences and abductee experiencers who have trauma, obviously, and who were, this relates to the Draco Dragon script story. And the Dragon script story is part of the slideshow that I prepared for later in today's conversation. But so that I was very excited then. Bridget said she came back from the Eyrie-land, nest for eagles, with a powerful experience there, which ends with something about the singing stones, which we shall see, the mystery shall unpack. So Bridget's going to now tell us a little bit about her story, her recent trip to Eyrie-land.
Oh, I love that wonderful foreshadowing. There's some rich gems in here that we have for you guys. Um, well, thank you, Dan. I appreciate it. And I think that it really begins, like I said, with us having these conversations and so much of what you've retrieved in your wisdom is like, hey, like there's so much, particularly in indigenous, and this ancestral memory. And for me being majority Caucasian white, I'm like, well, should I just bow my head and be like, oh, I got nothing? And I'm like, I know that there's more. I know there's more. And so I had been going back to the Celtic Isles, where most of my lineage is from, for years. And every time I retrieve more and more. But in this case, this past summer, I led a group on a retreat in Ireland. And during the retreat, it was located in a place in Southern Ireland that I have no ancestors. So I thought, right? I'm like, I don't have any ancestors, but I have an affinity. I have a love for this land, this place. And so we're in the hotel room, late at night, and I'm feeling this energy. And one of my girlfriends is like, are you sure you don't have ancestors here? Like there was a prompt, there was something happening. And I went back in my genealogy, which is quite good because of the Mormon background of those ancestors. And then I discovered that, oh my gosh, like I do have an ancestor from this place. And then I said the name McCarthy, and then my other friend said the McCarthy Castle ruin is right outside of the hotel. And I was like, what? And so I go on a walk to this ruin and I start to feel this charge. I start to feel this energy, especially in my kidneys and my body. I'm like, and I don't like, for me, I was like, whatever. This was 600 years ago. What's that? The only thing that's relevant in ancestral work is 7 generations. That's what I've always been taught. It's like, just within that close proximity. This was so long ago. It probably doesn't have any relevance. So I wasn't thinking much about it, but I was really feeling some energy. And I was like, "Ooh, the clan is from around here."
The clan.
And
You are
right, yeah, and
immortal. Highlander, you are immortal.
yeah. And so I ended up doing more research, and it ends up being that my ancestor built, lived, and died in that castle that I was sleeping next to.
Oh.
And it was really obvious to me that they were contacting me through time, and that there's a resonance in me that has a similar resonance for who they were, what they stand for. And like, I was connecting with that stream, even by the fact that I had been called, of anywhere on earth, right back there. And we ended up going to this incredible Abbey, and there's this clan, the McCarthy clan, who were stewards of millions of acres. They were original Irish indigenous. They had this tree there, and in the veneration of trees, do you know much about? I feel like you know a lot about the veneration of trees. Is there
Well,
anything you want to add to that?
well, no, no. I think you were talking. Was it a yew tree? Is that a?
Yeah, it was a yew tree.
Yeah. Well, I
Yes.
just have this vivid memory as we traveled around UK, there were a lot of people that did almost nothing but make a map of all the great old yew trees, and they would visit them one at a time and try to inhabit the array. So, there's maps of all the old yew trees of UK, and it's like a sacred duty to link them in your awareness, like linking your synapses. Very interesting. So the yew tree is very ancient old roots. Yes, yes.
And why do you think the yew tree, by the way? I
I
mean, because
think,
there's incredible other trees.
yeah, I'm not sure. Perhaps I just had the impression it's one of the trees that tends to live the longest, perhaps, because a lot of those
Mm,
trees are hundreds, perhaps even some thousands of years old, the ancient yew
right.
trees of UK. And so I think the age of those roots, which is the story we're about to get to, when your DNA crystallizes into a very long wave, very long memory, da da da, the array gets bigger and obviously heals the memory. So.
Yeah. Yeah, and so there's this veneration of trees, this real reverence, right? Because of its connectivity through time, and you can talk
Right.
more about that. And and this yew tree, which is pretty interesting, it's did the tree come first or did the church and the abbey, right? There, and most of the time actually the tree came first and then the abbey came around it, because the
Mhm.
pagans, the earth worshippers would go to the tree and they're like, okay, well, then we're going to build this around that. And
And
so I
and
went to this.
and just to
Yeah.
say, the arborescence means perfect branching, perfect fractality is what trees symbolize. And classically, even the Cistercian cathedrals, for example, the abbeys, were built on the cistern because it's the fractal branching that brings the water, that brings the magnetism, symbolizes the fractality of the tree. So the abbey can't really function unless there's implosive circulating charge, symbolizes both by the cistern and the fractality of the ancient tree. So if the tree withers, then the abbey withers because the magnetic flow.
Oh, see, this is the stuff, right? Everyone
Right.
listening, like, this is the juice. Thank
The
you,
real
Dan.
juice. Yeah, yeah.
Um,
So, but your
yeah,
story, your
I'm
story.
just like experiencing it, and I love that you can share those details. So I mean, I just was completely entranced, like, by this place, just completely engulfed in the energy of this space. And there was a real interconnection between the abbey and the prayer. It was very obvious, and the tree, like this interconnectedness.
Mhm.
And what I realized is that this tree had been there, for, they say it's at least around 600 years old. This is the Macross Abbey. It's one of the most photographed trees actually in Ireland. So it's a very famous place because it's just profound. And it had been burnt many times, this abbey, and there's stories of this all through Ireland and the UK. I think Dan has the picture. Yeah. So
Well,
this
it's
is a picture of the
your
yew
picture.
tree.
Yeah, yeah. There's ancient yew tree, right?
Yeah, and so
Yeah.
this is it in the abbey, and it had been burned several times, but the tree didn't burn. And there's lots of myth around this happening all around the UK. Sometimes they do burn, but often, particularly the yew trees, didn't. But what was interesting is I was, again, just so taken by this place, and it was actually built by the McCarthys again. And I'm like, okay, what's this history? And so I started looking into the history because I felt again, such an affinity to these ancestors from 600 years ago contacting me. I'm like, what is this? And when I looked into the history of this Abbey, it was that ancestor, not a direct ancestor, but within the clan, had gotten a vision, they said, or a dream that there needed to be a devotional monastery, a place of worship that needed to be built, like in this area. And it's a gorgeous area. And so they were going around trying to find, like, where is the place for this spot? And then kind of when all these things went amiss and they couldn't quite really find, the right place, they came upon a little girl. Oh yeah, and in the vision, the key to the vision was that the Abbey was going to be connected to the idea of rock of music. That was like in the vision. It's like this Abbey and the rock of vision. And so there wasn't anything coming up. And then finally they went out and they found this little girl singing on the rocks. And that's like what it was said. And then they knew that that's where it needed to be. And that's where the McCross Abbey is, like next to that yew tree. And so whether it was an actual little girl singing or whether it was the stone singing, there's just like something profound, right, that was resonant of why that sacred place needed to be there.
Yeah, which was to add flavor here, the actual Celtic name Carreg na Chiuli, is it Chiul? Yeah, Carreg meaning rock or stone, na Chiuli has, of course, means to sing, but also I think Chiul is some of the words for dragon or ancestor, the Hule. And so one point here is the metaphor of the singing stone, actually. So they had to find a place where there was a singing stone. And you all know that, for example, we're going to talk about pyramids implode the energy of the Earth's conjugate pump wave Schumann, and they're called the Hummer by the ancients, literally a singing stone. And we'll look at some pictures of that. And so why did the Abbey had to be based on a singing stone? That's where the mythology starts here. And that's so
this is where the real story begins.
Yeah, well, and so I give two metaphors for where we could start sort of meditating on the myth, as it were. One is, when Anne Rice said that the dragon line, I mean the vampire line, it was a bloodline that gradually the blood got thicker and thicker until actually the blood crystallized. Now we know that the DNA braids and then braids the braid on the braid, embeds. And then the father of all vampires, according to Anne Rice, if you, again, this is myth, was literally, she called it Enkil, a cross between Enki and Enlil. Enlil, we now know, his ancestor is dragon, Draco, literally. Enlil's mother, Enlil's mother was Draco. We now know more, a lot of detail on that. And so the Enki, Enlil, the two brothers of the Anak Empire, which is really what I call dragon script DNA. And I want to show you a little bit of the slideshow of dragon script DNA. So the script in the DNA is literally the shape of the fields of bliss or emotion, which embed, it's called the dragon script because it is swallowed down the throat of DNA. And the DNA recursively braids until the plot thickens. I mean, the DNA thickens so much. Your ventricle horns crystallize and your DNA crystallize. And this becomes an ancient giant, as it were, array that has then stabilized. And if you can inhabit that large array, which connects our ancestors, and that array is literally a singing stone. And the second little metaphor before we do our little visuals here, I loved it. I don't know if you did, but when in 2001 and then 2010, the films, Dave, I'm sorry, Dave, I can't do that. Well, at the end, Dave realizes that there's so many ancient dolmen in an array down below. He gets closer and closer to the dolmen. And then he says there's thousands of them in here. And obviously they're fractal. And then when he wakes up in the beginning of the next film, 2010, he is inhabiting the array. And by doing that, he can appear in anybody's TV set he wants to. I mean, he can precipitate his awareness anywhere into that array.
And what movie is that?
2001, 2010, is it Clark? Kubrick, I always get it. 2001, very famous. Of course, I'm showing my age here.
No, that's great. We need to know about these
and,
great
and
films.
the sequel film is 2010. Kubrick, Clark, that whole series. And basically, Dave is on the ship and there's a computer running the ship. And then he realizes that the computer is soulless. And then,
Right.
but they've been dispatched to look at the dolmen in the moons of Jupiter, I believe, which now we know is where Enki actually returned, Ganymede. And that's another story. But the metaphor to meditate on here is, what does it mean to inhabit the array? And is that array a singing stone? And which is, and so then we actually start. So this next there's a set of visuals to go with this. Let me see if I can do this correctly. It would be.
And this would be too for other people listening, because I mean, sometimes I'm not just trying to like highlight these interesting experiences that I have. They just happen and we're using them as, tools of learning, but it was really empowering because this concept of what Dan's talking about, as well as the connection with the stones, I think particularly, I mean, probably with most lineages around the world, but at least for me in the Celtic lineages, it's like stones were part of our, like, how we did all of this, embedding, and to realize that that all of us can start to access this through this science.
Yes, literally understanding what the singing stone is and how to inhabit the array. Exactly. And so I wanted to use the science behind pyramids as global wireless power to understand a little bit about inhabiting that array. And I was trying to bring up that set of, yes, get the visuals right. Here we go. Okay. So remember, in the book Two-Thirds, David Myers, David Percy, the Arcturians are describing the ancient culture of pyramid buildings as the Hummer, which is literally a singing stone. And the stone singing in this case is the array of pyramids. And so the singing stones become the Stargate metaphor. And so this is from the new website, pyramidwirelesspower.com, which is where I'm trying to explain the sort of history of the science here. And this is the Schumann harmonic cascade, which is incredibly magically tuned, almost exactly the exact harmonics of the Schumann cascade, 7.83, 14.3, 20.8. That harmonic cascade of the Schumann series is almost incredibly magically golden ratio exponents times Planck, called planckfire.com. And that can make the pyramid sing, literally, the singing stone. And the implosion in those pyramids, and here's some of our measures, the 53 hertz, perfectly in that cascade, 7.83 to 53 golden ratio series, makes the pyramids implode, and then out the center is emitted a coherent longitudinal wave because of that implosion called global wireless power, and if you go to the nodes in that array, you can inhabit the array. The array looks like this. This is where the pyramids are located. And these are not just the nodes where you can then pick up the global wireless power in the array of singing stones. I mean, the Hummer, I mean, the pyramids. But this is also now proven, if you believe Bruce Cathy and then Kozyrev, these nodes in this array is literally the mechanism of optimized telepathy at those nodes, and that's been measured. That's the singing stone inhabiting the array. Literally, the reason that then this is called a gravity diode is because that implosive cascade converting in the vortex, which looks like, well, here's the cascade. These are the Schumann harmonics. This is those measurements of those harmonics in a tree and later in the pyramids. And that implosion of that cascade, which is also literally the frequencies exactly of the brainwave harmonics that you then implode when you have bliss, your brainwave literally becomes a singing stone in the sense that it crystallizes, stabilizes, and implodes. So it's all about this singing stone. And that's what the vortex looks like. And that's how the transverse is converted to longitudinal. You've seen all these slides. And so it's dramatic that that 0.1 hertz Mayer wave, most important frequency in the blood and the body and the HRV, the LF component, 0.1 hertz is the famous 26-second Earth pulse frequency. And here's the 53 hertz we measured in the Bosnian pyramid and in nature and in the biodome. And yeah, and here's the famous, exactly on that cascade, 53 hertz, you have the famous global history of the 52 hertz whales. The whales are singing exactly the frequencies of that cascade. Why? So we want to get this metaphor then of where this connects to ancestral memory in the blood. And I have called that dragon script DNA from an original article which I published at goldenmean.info/dragonscriptdna. Let's see if I can do this now. Okay. Where's power? Okay, here's the article. Are you seeing DragonScript DNA there?
Yep.
Okay, so this is goldenmean.info/dragonscript DNA. Is this how dragons, the ancient dragon blood, we're going to call it Uru in a moment, as they breathe fire into the throat of DNA? And so is this how dragons communicate? And we're going to see that the actual language of Old Sumerian and Old Hebrew, and actually Rovash Irash, which is the dragon script of the Hungarian and Romanian ancient sacred Rovash Irash. So the dragon.
And when you say dragon, you like it's meaning Draco, like from the Draco DNA.
Draco is one of the meanings here. Remember, when I tracked down the Uru in Uru Asa LM and Roman Uruan, we're going to see the table in a minute, I said Uru meant ancient dragon blood, ancient Draco blood. And Elena Denon said, oh, but it also means Stargate or portal, which is related because the implosion in the throat of DNA, the dragon script, that you make when you implode the braiding of DNA literally makes this giant dragon worm that threads through the blood, literally Dune, for example. And so this the story we tell in Dune, and we're going to, part of this story we want to tell right now relates to the Mormon memory, probably related to the Seraphim story. Why did they have to burn genetic records onto gold foil or copper strips? The Seraphim attempt, because they were trying to find the way to put a soul back into DNA, literally implode it, because they were losing long-term memory. So we call this the ubiquitous dragon story, dragon. And this was An Ag Ur of Hungary and Magyar and Rovash Irash. I'm going to see those slides. Yeah, so this is the tetracube of the Rovash Irash, which is Hungarian, Magyar, or Man Ag Ur. And we're going to see those slides in a minute. And this becomes the table of the ancient Sumerian Anak family, which obviously is Anu, Enki, and Lil and their family, which shows up right here in the tetracube of the symmetry set of the ancient dragon script called Rovash Irash, the ancient sacred dragon alphabet. And the slides we're going to show in a minute. Yeah, and so you've all seen this slide of here is the Uru of ancient dragon script in the blood. And so many of our ancient letters like Uru Asa LM, meaning Uru, ancient dragon blood or Stargate, and Asa meaning queen of, and L meaning place of phase shift, translation of vorticity from transverse to longitudinal, literally Stargate, making the L or phase shift. And this is the ancient sacred dragon from Magyar, Anag Ur, of Rovash Irash, the ancient alphabet, which is that tetracube. So that's all. We're discussing all that at that article about dragon script DNA. And now, then that conversation goes about the importance of the gold plates to store the shadow of a sequence of magnetic donuts, in this case called ME as in measurement. The Sumerian word for computer disk, ME, was actually in, and this does this relate to Mormonism? You tell me. Was there a myth of genetic records on gold plates? Do you?
Yeah.
Yeah. And,
And then they're the greatest genealogists on the planet. So
yeah.
they're pretty in. That's why I could even know what happened in the story earlier.
So what did they tell you when you asked them why they put their genetic plates, their genetic records on gold plates or copper plates? Or where did that tradition come from?
I don't know.
Well, that's the question we want to answer right now if we're good.
Yeah.
So what we're saying here is the myth of the Seraphim, which is high-winged dragon, probably ancestors of what today we call Siakar, which are the royal Draco, that the Draco lost long-term memory, exactly what our story today is about: loss of long-term memory, loss of long wave, loss of implosive braiding, loss of the singing rock. And
Hmm.
and so remember, they're describing literally in ancient Draco history, yes, we lost our long-term memory. They're conscious of that. And to get that back, they're fighting to restore what I would call soul and DNA, the Seraphim ancestors, which is part of the Mormon history. And one way they do that is they need to store the shadows of donuts symmetries, which we call ancient alphabet, which actually is the tetracubic symmetry of the way you braid DNA to implode and make a soul. And we're about to see those slides. And so now we know what's on the gold plates that the Seraphim are storing in ancient sacred Mormon history, which is a sequence of genetic records, literally the burnt shadows of Taurus donuts, which we now know is Hebrew and Sanskrit, the shadows of the spiral, shadows on the wall of the cave. And by doing that, remember the tetracubic symmetry is DNA codon symmetry, the 64 codon array. That's all tetracubic shadows of. So it's literally the cookbook for recording the braid geometry of DNA to say, oh, where did we lose the recipe for soul?
Mm.
Which is to say long-term memory, which is to say implosion in the blood, which is to say access to bliss, which is this Mormon tradition of, we're going to have to record the genetic lineage because we lost the recipe. Humpty Dumpty's egg, the whole shtick. Okay, so that brings us to the animations. But do you see, does that make some sense in terms of, I had a friend who actually said they saw the cave in which the gold plates were outside of Utah. I mean, there are literal stories there.
Yeah.
Did you've heard stories like that, or?
I haven't heard stories of the gold plates, but I have heard stories that the pioneers coming across, they said they didn't know where they were going, and then God told them, once they arrived in Salt Lake City, this was the place. But actually, they knew all along because they knew about the Spanish enslaving the Utes to get the gold. So they
Yes.
were landing there because they knew that had the gold. And so they were needing the gold for something. And so it does surround around at least that element.
And looking for a heart of gold and growing old. I mean, Sitchin says, well, they harvested the gold because they use it to restore atmosphere. Oh, that's part of the truth. And then Lawrence Gardner, Genesis of the Real Thing, well, they were harvesting the gold because they were eating it. That's also part of
Right.
the truth, the gold powder, which became called Holy Communion, the manna, the ormes, the spice must flow. But
Yeah.
at another level, the gold was a symmetry device to store the actual geometry of implosion, which could happen in the blood. And when the blood implodes, remember, you have bliss, you have psychokinesis, you can bend the light, only love bends the light, therefore only love creates. So when you get DNA imploding, all of the magic begins because you spit out longitudinal, you make the stuff called lucid dreaming, and you make the stuff called Ba from the Kesjan rainbow light body, which is called having a soul, if you can lucid dream, So it's like I say, this is Humpty Dumpty, definitely. That is Humpty Dumpty's all the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty together again. And we've told this story before. So the Dracos, there they are. They have been managing the bloodlines of the royal families of Europe for like, I don't know, 500 years, just like we would do show dogs, because they're
Right.
trying to cook up a soul. And Humpty Dumpty, for some reason, couldn't put that egg, which had a soul, back together again. And that is a symmetry recipe for implosion. And we'd like to look at the pictures and the clues. So, did you, I mean, did Humpty Dumpty feature in your childhood or?
Well, yeah, in some ways. Well, I'm like wanting to connect all these dots because I'm curious how then like the stones work with this, and I will add another layer to the story, which I think will totally complement what you're talking about. So after I had this experience in Ireland, about a month later, I went back to Utah, and I found out that 7 generations back. So again, 7 generations is more relevant than 600 years ago. And I went to the cemetery of my male ancestors 7 generations ago, the first one, like ones that I came from in Salt Lake City. And they had a little cemetery, and I was like, "Hey, where is this cemetery? They have their own cemetery. This is interesting because it was a prominent family. This male ancestor was working directly with Brigham Young and in the temples doing weird stuff probably. And so I was like, let's go to this cemetery. And of course, my brother and mom and nephew have to go on whatever wild spiritual adventures I want. And lo and behold, this cemetery is in the middle, in the heart of this it's not a city, but it's like in the middle of this town. So there's literally roads, McDonald's, I mean, like bowling alley, like it's just in the middle of a city, and it had been built around it, right? The cemetery was small, but it was like the family cemetery. And I sat at this cemetery, and I don't agree with most of the things that this ancestor passed on, except for like the resilience of being an epic pioneer and those qualities. But I didn't feel anything. Like I'm just standing there, like above the bones of these ancestors that are only, 150 years ago, and I'm not feeling anything. And then I go back to Ireland and stand, at the Macross Abbey has the bones of those ancestors, by the way. That was like the family burial of those
Hmm.
ancestors. And I'm just feeling all the things, right? Like at the castle, at this abbey, I'm like, oh my gosh, like I feel the things. And so now it's making more sense as we're talking about the landscape enhancing and
Yeah.
able to
Where the long
implode.
waves cross, the long magnetic lines cross, which was not happening in the ancestral burial ground in a city, but was happening where the magnetic lines were still alive and there was soul, and then you could feel it in your bones.
So how much of it, because I'm curious, because there's a resonance of those, say, ancestors in Ireland, like that is connected to my resonance right now. So there's that piece. And I don't really have as much resonance with those,
The bones
polygamist, I don't know what
in
they did,
Utah.
ancestors,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so there's a resonance piece, but resonance is, maybe partly that genetic energy. And then there's the land that makes that genetic be able to be ancestral memory that's
Yeah.
perceivable. So what would you say is going on there?
Yeah. So if the long wave magnetic lines are alive and you inhabit those same magnetic lines for 100 generations, the piezo crystal in your bones records those long waves quite literally. And many, if not most, ancient tribes would then grind up and drink the bones of their ancestors, and they would inhabit the memory absolutely. And the only name for God was actually ancestor memory, as in those piezo long waves. And there was a war, almost a war on the Hopi when they tried to put a metal sewage pipe in the old burial ground, because they know the ancestor memories would live or die based on whether those magnetic lines still flowed through those bones. So that makes
So you think if that was still farmland where like the cemetery
it would
was,
help.
without all the metal buildings and all that stuff, I might feel it more.
The longer wave was there, but also whether to what extent those ancestors themselves had access to bliss and inhabited the dragon current, the song lines themselves. And so, inhabiting the long way, the piezoelectric nature of bone is the longest wave of memory in the body for sure. So if you'd like, there's ancient whalebone churches in Thule.
Oh,
Yeah, I mean, it's literally a church of the ancient giant whale bones, and you go in there and like your hair stands up. Thule, it's the last king of Thule. It's a famous book. So, and it starts with a cathedral made of whale bones. Man, is there a long wave there? It's like presence of the long wave.
so there's the burial, but then there's the embedding into the land itself. So say there's like bones, in the graveyards we're talking about. But then I mean, I've felt what was I was corrected, which was great. More people are like coming to me with really good history. But the Shoshone that lived in the Salt Lake Valley, which is different than the Utes, like I feel them in the mountains, you
Mhm.
know? So how does the memory, because I want to weave this in, for other people of like, how can we start connecting with the memory? Because the more and more I'm around this, it's the memory of the ancestors. It doesn't have to be ours exactly, because it's all wanting, our
Yeah,
life and goodness. So how can people start connecting with that? And does
it's
that go back to the rocks and being in these certain places?
the rocks that could sing. Well, I mean, one point would be that the Aboriginal wisdom is very clear. Ancestral memory is the divine, and access to it, the songline we now know quite clearly, is literally, physically, electrically measurable as a longitudinal array of coherence. Specifically, what we can measure is the stuff that takes you into a lucid dream, and obviously, therefore, through death. So creating that coherence to that longitudinal array, and it's beautiful that you should say, oh, by the way, it's really only one memory. Collectively, the Earth grid, dodecaecosa, that's one array. You inhabit an array now, it's called your synapses. When you die or you dream, you need to inhabit a larger array. And the only way you can do that, which means obviously you need a magnetic line for birth and death and ritual and bliss. And the line cross points where telepathy is enabled. So, and that is a singing rock in a sense, literally. So if you had a map of the magnetic lines, you'd have, a tool to find the singing rock. So then maybe that takes us to the next part, the final part of the slideshow that I prepared, I hope.
Yeah.
Which I'm trying to swing back into some more pieces of the Mormon memory here. That's what I'm trying
Hmm.
to do. Okay, so you see on this slide, do you see the slide there? This
Yeah.
this is the language tree. This is from Anton Parks, who I believe is one of the best historians of the Anki Ea story. Although certainly Elena Denon has the current update on it, but the history of it was beautifully described in it. And Anton Parks is describing, as in Aboriginal lore, why Australia probably became a desert was because the male shaman and the female shaman had a separate language, which is straight out of Draco. And this is the Draco history from Anton Parks. And he's naming those separate language, the male tribe versus the female tribe, called Emesa versus Emagir. And the male tribal language then became named Emesai, Babylonian, and then Akkadian, okay, et in Arcadia ego. Now, there's a very key, if you study your Mormon history, and I'm not an expert, but I did some study, and Joseph Smith's tablet key for how to read the the script on the tablets. He was studying Old Akkadian, actually, which was related to Old Egyptian, actually, which is the root of the male priest language, versus the languages of the females, I believe here. Let me see if I got that right, which was Sumerian. Oh, no, I'm sorry, Proto-Sumerian. Oh, no, I'm sorry. It's the female side that was Emesa, and the female side became Akkadian. I got to get this right because they were called the dragon queens, remember? Uru Asa, queen of dragon, Uru Asa LM, versus the male side, which was Emagir, and that was Sumerian. Okay, so clearly Joseph Smith was studying Old Egyptian which was literally Akkadian, Society Akkaldam, which is where my study of Gurdjieff began, Society of Akkaldam. Well, when Joseph Smith learned to read the tablets. And how did he read the tablets? Next slide. What do you think the Urim and Thummim were?
Yeah, I don't know.
I mean, didn't you study Mormon for half a life?
No. No, I didn't study any of it. I was like, this is well, I felt the separation, of men and women and like the divide of like I was like, this doesn't work. This isn't working what you guys are doing. So I was like, I don't really want to study what you're doing.
So when Joseph Smith said he was only able to interpret the tablets, remember the tablets are a burnt series of magnetic donuts with shadows of the symmetry of an electric field torus burnt onto the gold or copper foil, which obviously we now know are genetic sequence records. And in order to read them, to interpret them, to lift them off and see what the symmetry was, he used Urim and Thummim. What was that? Why, that looks like a tetrahedron to me. Doesn't that to you?
Yeah.
And so when you look through an optical tetra, you could use that to index the sequence of donut symmetries. And in a minute, I'm going to play the animations of the origin of Hebrew, which are the shadows of a spiral on a donut indexed by the tetracube. Which tetracube, by the way, has exactly 7 arrows, which is 7 generations, 7 spins, et cetera, et cetera. So now you don't have to go far to find scandal in Mormon history. I, I, I think actually Bridget was pretty good at that herself.
Yeah.
When you found that it appeared that the Mormons actually were, did you say, helping to permit the abductions? The great with
Yeah. Yeah.
how did you come
I
to
don't
that?
even remember. I think that was someone like a part like that was in that kind of deep state,
Yeah,
insight into that. And it only made sense because, one of the biggest underground bases for
yeah.
those technologies is right there. I'm like, yeah, this all makes sense. You let in the NSA, you're like, yeah, you guys just are,
I mean, it
really
seemed
have an open door policy.
the myth seemed like the ancient caves under the Mormon temples related to Seraphim, but the fallen Seraphim, Siakar, would be the royal ancestors of Draco. So obviously the dragon history has everything to do with. Okay, so this is Rovash Irash, Urash Irash, and notice that that's an index of a tetracube symmetry, and that alphabet, if you actually read those letters in ancient Hungarian on Agur, you get not only their alphabet, but the names of Enki and Enlil. And you all know that if you animate
All field effect in all of matter is
that
self-organizing.
spiral on the donuts
The donut
and use the shadow of the tetra,
and that
you
self-organizing
have
golden
Aleph,
spiral on the donut.
Beit, Gimel, Dalet.
If we tilt that golden spiral,
And not only does that give you the Hebrew letters indexed by the tetracube, and the tetracube arrows are the taggin or the crownlets, as you all know, which shows you your symmetry relationship indexed by the tetracube, the taggin or crown. And then if you take the same letters and put a vertical and horizontal bar to index your tetracube relative symmetry of 7 arrows, you have Sanskrit. That's how it appears. And so that is a story of a fire crystal, an An-Ag-Ur, which in this case was called Ugur in the study of Anton Parks, which the Silmarillion of Tolkien, the Girku of Anton Parks, the Tuoi stone or fire crystal of Edgar Casey of Atlantean fire crystal, the Vril stone. Remember, Vril is a name for when the emitted longitudinal coherence becomes directional. It's called the Vril. That's why it makes both gravity and seed germination. So that's the fire crystal. And that crystal, in part, is what was called Me, M-E, from which we get the term measurement, Me Asa Uru. Measurement, Me Asa Uru, means Uru, the queen, the dragon, Asa, royal blood, consulted the computer disk, ME, which was this fire crystal. And this was the tool that, and this all through Anton Park's study, the use of the Uyghur stone, which also we think is what's, all those pictures of the little purse all the ancient Sumerians are holding, the little purse. What do you think is in that purse?
One of those.
Half of the wars of the Sumerians were access to the ME stones, which Sitchin is convinced is a Sumerian word for computer disk. Isn't that a
Makes sense? Yeah.
Anyway, so this is the ancient dragon blood, and this is the ancient Sumerian goddess from the Ubayyad.
So you would say that the ancient angelic race like brought those tablets to Joseph Smith, or what would you say happened? How did he get access to those?
So, he had some psychic access to the ancient myth. The ancient myth is the high dragon ancestors, Seraphim, winged dragon, the noble ancestors of the Draco royalty called Siakar, when they still had a soul before the wars of the sexes, they endeavored to store the genetic records, literally the cookbook, to implode DNA and make a soul, because Humpty Dumpty's egg was broken. And today, Enki Ea, for whom Earth is named, who's back outside in Ganymede, specifically calls this Adam Kadmon, which was the plan to cook up a symmetry sequence, literally a donut sequence, in DNA to make and have a soul. So your kids could lucid dream and take a memory through death. That was the cookbook. And the cookbook to that implosion in DNA, which is these alphabet letter stories, was the Adam Kadmon. And that's what we kind of lost because we no longer inhabit the songlines. That's the point. And here is the sacred, I've told this story, when our ancestor, Lorraine Maffei Williams, died, the storm across the 1,000-mile ley line across Australia was the song line that her ancestors inhabited for generations. So that dragon line, that song line, right across the continent, that decades level storm passed just when Auntie Lorraine died, her ancestors had been inhabiting that song line like we have a pet puppy for 100 generations. So that song, that was a dragon line that was still alive. That's the point. And so this becomes part of how, if you keep the dragon lines alive, then you keep rain. And the global problem, obviously, desertification, it's proven that when patriarchy spreads, which is failure to touch, you cause the spread of deserts. So when these long magnetic lines of dragon currents are not honored, obviously, which is called permission to touch, which is pretty much a name for matrilineal lineages, which make rain, coming of age in Samoa, versus patriarchal lineages, which prevent rain, measurably and documented, if you believe desertification and patriarchy, James DeMeo. So they had the skill to make these dolmen implosive, and today they put steel rebar in the stupa, and that kills them. But in ancient times, they were true implosive capacitors that could make the rock sing. And the ancient Greeks are saying that when they get the fire to light itself, when they sing the sacred letters, and the sacred flame actually lights in the church, and only if you use the right Greek letters, they say. And then the sacred fire lights by itself, so that literally the lighting of the flame. So then we're tracking this bloodline, the Anak Empire, and you've all seen this. This is from a Recipe for Schizophrenia, Golden Mean Recipe for Schizophrenia. And so the Anak Empire, Enki becomes Ptah, Poseidon, Ea, Atun, Lucifer, Tom, and literally who is the author of The Nine from Andrew Puharich, whom I knew very well. And that was Fish God. And that story goes on. And that's the spice and the dragon current. So the line of David is this fire in the blood, Tehute, DWD equals TWT. So everywhere it says the line of David in the Bible, it literally means children of Thoth, especially including Thothmosis out of Egypt, being the bloodline that became royal Essene, literally Magdalene. So this is Genesis of the Grail King, specifically in the sense of Where is the fire in the blood? And so we saw this before, the Anak-Ur, Anak-Uria, and so many of our ancient terms have Uru in it. So somebody needs to ask, who was Uru? This was the ancient dragon blood looking to cook up a soul again. And that's the point. This is showing that the various ETs that interfered with Earth history, from the Stuart Swerdlow record of the Montauk, that actually came later to fit what Elena Denon is talking about in the cedar races. And so this is the language tree Ur-Elik. Who is Ur? I ask you, who is Ur? Old Turkish, the Turkish was called Orkan versus Orkney. Did your experiences connect with Orkney Islands in some way?
No, not yet. There's so many wonderful places.
Well, my friend Ray Camelay, he studied the sacred ancient music in the Orkney Islands, and he came back with stories. But I think the Orkney relates to the spirit. Who were the orcs? And the giant orcs, the origin term Orkney literally means orcish, but if you look at who was orc in Tolkien, you see it's right out of the Draco and the Grey story. Who were the orcs? It's literally written out in quite some detail in Lord of the Ring. So I think the orcs we could find a lot about from Lord of the Rings, actually. So this is Anak-Ur, Uria, and I then interviewed many times Johann Fritz, who described meeting the Draco White Queen, actually the Dragon Queen, and was one of the few humans to survive that meeting. And we did a whole series of interviews and discussions on the long wave history of the Orion Wars, literally contained in the dragon blood. So it's just a few more slides. So this is more of this ET history. Remember, all of this this record of the ET history that we've been collecting for many years is at fractalfield.com/fusion in the blood. Note Hungarian Anak-Ur, Uria, east of Eden. And this is the geometry of the ancient excuse me, the geometry of the not Hebrew, but I'll come back to it. It was, if you do this, the sounds of the letters, you get the actual map of the table of the letters, which it relates to Vedic, and the same was true of Hebrew. You pronounce the letter, you get the shape of the letter form. So you're literally burning the angle of the torus into the dragon script, which is the blood itself. And this in angel alphabets was the hypercube symmetry of the origin of Ophanum Enochian, goldenmean.info/Ophanum. And here, now we're at least back to close to our theme. Who was Gabriel? When we realized that whoever sent a message to Mary in the Bible was Gabriel. Who sent a message to Muhammad, the Muslims? It was Gabriel. Who sent the message to Joseph Smith?
Gabriel?
It was Gabriel.
Ah.
Now, if he was a seraphim trying to create a genetic solution, all of these religions, we call it Abrahamic religions, Abra, probably meaning Enki. And Gabriel is sort of there behind the scenes pulling strings saying, maybe we can fix Humpty Dumpty's egg here. Was there a genetic agenda between Gabriel whispering to the origins of all the religions, and all the religions seem to have begun with a fear of women?
Right, because that's what I'm like sitting there going, okay, so they're wanting to recook this good recipe.
Yep.
But I'm like, they're missing the very thing you started with, which is like that the men and women need to be connected, right? And that then the touch. So those are some of the things, right, that are going to help with the implosion, with the ensoulment. Is how does that work with the men and women? Them just being in coherence and connection again, and like and touch and love, or how does that work if we're learning the lessons from these religions that separated, like in a lot of senses, men and women?
Yeah, patriarchy seems to demonstrably cause the spread of deserts. And one of the ways it does that, if we may joke about why the football players get more money than the teachers in UK, it is in the Balinese cockfight analysis of football, according to Carl Jung, that urge to touch, frustrated, hint, patriarchy, turns to anger by definition, and that anger becomes literally a poison pellet, sometimes called a turd, otherwise known as a football, which you need to push out, the poison. And so he did quite a detailed analysis of the origin of football, which I don't think the National Football League is going to use for public relations, actually.
No, I don't think so.
No, but actually, the reason that teenagers destroy their bodies so regularly, including David Icke, with football, is because literally they didn't read Coming of Age in Samoa, which was a touch permissive, matrilineal, female empowered culture, the opposite of patriarchy. And in Samoa, the teenagers were not repressed and they had lots of rain. But now the example I have used, and I think we've talked about this before, but my friend Malcolm Borgward from Perth, he was a shaman, and he was understood that for hundreds of years, the female shaman versus the male shaman in Australian Aboriginal culture, they died cursing the opposite sex, literally. There were literally probably thousands of years of curses because remember, the male tribe and the female tribe had a different language in Australia, which is straight out of Draco. That is Draco.
Yeah.
And as a result, those curses between the male and the female tribes, this was ancient tradition. And so Malcolm Borgward went across the continent to the key villages, and he would do rituals to heal the pain and anger for the ancient female shaman versus the males. And in those rituals, they would sing and dance, and they would embrace the touch, and they do this whole thing. It was very famous at the time, and you should talk to him. Huge rainstorms followed him across the continent every single time. So literally, he was teaching permission to touch. So the reason desertification is caused by patriarchy is literally when our children do not know how to touch, our magnetic lines do not know how to touch and make roses and implode and attract rain. And so literally the magnetic lines break. And the rose, I mean the fractal, I mean the singing rock, I mean the fractal crystal breaks, and there's no more rain.
Yeah.
And so if we don't know how to keep the symmetry in the sacred long lines, then not only do we lose rain, we lose ancestral memory. That's really the key. And the part of that symbolism is literally the very ancient War of the Sexes that's right out of Draco history. Remember how that began, we believe from the book Theuba, was that the ancient Draco, Siakar royalty, we believe related probably in the hoary ancient times of myth. And remember, the Dracos admit they lost long-term memory. But in the hoary ancient time of myth, Theuba, meaning Thuban in Draco, from the book Theuba, the Draco ancestors were androgynous. And the culture was not a desert. And this is part of a very ancient myth, that they experimented in replicating sexually, which would accelerate evolution. However, the possible asymmetry that the women were actually biologically more powerful than the men. Look at the Pleiadian Tegata culture today. The women can replicate without the men. The men are optional. And now they're about 70% women. And it's part of the Swaru fall, actually, into AI. Uh, and so the asymmetry eventually led to a very ancient war of the sexes, which spread through the galaxy actually, and the use of the black goo, which probably infects the Kaaba stone, which is part of the patriarchy, is part of that story that those ancient tribes used super dielectrics for communicators, and that becomes a whole other story. But the point is that the happily ever after here is when we understand what's singing in those ancient rocks to connect those cultures and heal ancient tribal memories. And then we can take those long lines of memory inside ourselves. And the healing actually is the physics is that long memory is the longer the memory, the more the soul,
Mm.
a singing rock.
And so, how do we let those pieces in to ourselves from the singing rock, if you will?
Yeah, I mean, when you found the singing rock and you found some more ancestor memory, your your memory got bigger, your soul got bigger, and the array that you can inhabit with your memory got bigger, which in theory means the tornadoes that you can steer are now bigger.
Well, that's relevant. Live in Tornado Alley, so
Well,
um,
in Texas, but then I would say there's just one thing to mention there is one thing that I admire about your skill is I sense that you have such an amazing ability to achieve empathy that when you feel the pain of those ancestors, it's it's obviously how you steer a tornado. You have to feel the pain of the tornado,
yeah.
and then the tornado falls in love with you, and then you're the center of gravity, and you inhabit the right. So the empathy is the beginning of the suction.
Well, and those things, I mean, I came in with it, but I really didn't because I came from a culture of non-permission to touch. I like came from that land of that energy, that's like drying up. And
Mhm.
so I think it's important to note that it can be absolutely cultivated, it's able to be like reawakened.
No jokes here, but in Britain, we only hug our dogs and our horses. Thank you very much. And a stiff upper.
Right. It's an interesting thing, right? It's like, okay, that's where the colonization mindset, and that separation. Do you think that that's why the young kids today, like they're not touching and they're having all these issues? And
And
I mean,
permission
is
to touch.
that part of it?
Permission to touch is difficult, complicated. Touch
Yeah,
is considered generally illegal.
right.
And if you study, Britain, Beritan, birthplace of the Anunnaki, if you believe Lawrence Gardner, uh, and was literally a star map of Jerusalem. I mean, there's all kinds of myths and legends. We the Scythians is a good book by David Ritchie, but the whole star map of Jerusalem is all over UK, which means Beritan, birthplace of Anunnaki, the Anak Empire, literally the dragon lines. And in Britain, we have a stiff upper lip. Why is our upper lip stiff? Mother said, don't cry.
Right.
Ooh. When mom says don't cry, your upper lip gets stiff. Mm.
Mm.
Don't feel emotion. Don't express emotion. Don't touch. And that is straight Anak Empire. That's straight Draco, actually. And
Well, this is pretty nice. I mean, it kind of echoes back, to that time when I was with you in France, and you're like, you need to hug more puppies and little babies, and it's like, all right, so what the world needs is actually like more hugging, more touch, more feeling, more love with each other, with the land, and then that opens pockets, and then you embed with that, and then you get bigger, and that's the key.
And it really, if I think of my own background here, I was doing graduate psychophysiology at University of Detroit, and I absolutely did not know how to touch for sure.
Yeah.
And then at the Gurdjieff School, we started doing Sufi dance. And the Sufi dance, you're in the circle and you're feeling. And then we were doing Gurdjieff sacred gymnastic in a very disciplined array. And then I began to have waves of bliss, actually. And shortly after that, it was Kundalini, actually. And later I learned that Kundalini is literally a rainmaker. So it is, and that relates to what we've talked about many times, that the definition of culture then in Aboriginal is the ability to teach your young people how to have a bliss experience. Because then they implode, they become charged radiant, and they inhabit the array, they inhabit the land, and the land becomes fertile again. Arthur and the land are one. Whom does the Grail serve? Itself.
Yeah. And is there anything more you want to say about that since we're over in the Celtic Isles about Arthur and how that works?
I think it was an arc on a Taurus. I mean, Arthur. And I think it was an S word from an S tone. No, the sword from the stone. I mean, the magnetic line from the circle. How do you tempt
Mm,
the magnetic energy to emerge from the stone? How do you tempt the line to emerge from the circle, which is literally the difference between mass and energy? Obviously, it's pure intention. So if you're walking by the mountain and you feel an emotion that's shareable, the magnetism in that mountain comes to you because your pure intention makes that magnetism able to distribute. Literally a shareable wave, wet making power versus hard making power. You know, Adamic race is the hard making power, according to Faber d'Olivet. So, yeah.
have you studied Veda Austin's work on water?
Yes, we've done some films together. We've had a lot of fun together. She's doing, and she was following up on who's the guy that did the Japanese guy that did
Yeah, yeah, Emoto.
Emoto. Yeah, she was following, and it's true. The physics there is that the weak capacitive field will be frozen and made visible, literally becoming the stone. From the liquid to the crystal, which is literally the physics of bliss in blood and your ventricle horns. The crystal reveals the geometry of the charge field at the moment of crystallization. So she puts the water in the freezer, and if the water has good energy, then the geometry of crystallization, the Steiner people call that uh, crystallization processes and the blood. It's literally that the geometry of the spiritual field is really revealed in the geometry of crystallization if that spiritual field is present at the moment of crystallization, just like lightning freezes the memory. Daniel Brinkley survived lightning, the near-death experience, and that was the movie Powder. Suddenly, all the memory was present, which is just like in Kundalini. It feels like lightning at that moment. There's that implosion into stillness, and you inhabit a bigger array.
Yeah. Well, I was reminded when you said when you come with pure intention to the mountain and then it feels that and it comes to you. That's what she was saying that water does too. Like
Yes,
water's seeking like the resonant
yes,
energy as well,
exactly. And
which would make sense for rain.
yeah,
Like
that
I'm
exactly.
seeking you. I'm gonna rain on you that
Yeah,
are hugging and loving each other.
that's right. If there's bliss in your community, you will have rain. And if there's no touch, the rain goes away. And the physics there is very obvious. The geometry of the hydrogen bond is perfectly fractal, which I newly proved by equation. The center of the water and the center bond of DNA in both cases is hydrogen. So that's a perfect rose fractal. And that implosion allows the radiance. So the water literally can, if it's allowed to braid recursively and implode and Schauberger, then that water absolutely contains the long wave of memory as long as it's embedded in nature. Now, if you make that water go in a straight line and no longer can braid and doesn't touch organic materials, and also the water needs to stay cool, and it needs the forest
Yeah.
of shade, actually, which is Schauberger's principle. It was the colder water that was strong because heat is obviously a name for disorder.
Right. It's just fascinating, and we've touched on some new things here with the touch, even because within 150 years ish, of like the Mormons settling in Salt Lake City, the Great Salt Lake has gotten to the point where it is almost dried up, and
Uh,
like when even just 100 years ago, it like the lagoons would almost touch the foothills of the mountains, which was very far. It was like sweeping across like this mass space, and then it's receded, receded, receded. And so I'm like just thinking about this valley of non-touch and like of male female stuff and the patriarchy, and I'm like, okay, all this makes a lot of sense to me. And then where the shareable is the ancestral memory of the natives that were there, that it was held more in the mountains.
And the magnetic lines in a wet making culture look like a rose. And if we make a map of the magnetic lines and record them in the village, so we see, fractality in ancient African architecture, the village was literally a fractal rose magnetically. And then suddenly we take responsibility for the long magnetic lines, the health of the long magnetic lines. Like, do not build a highway that kills an ancient magnetic line, or you ain't going to have rain anymore. And by the way, the Suez Canal and the Panama Canal, why are they dying? Hint, clue, no rain. Where did the rain go? Oh, it went with the symmetry.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's not easy, but it is, with courage, there is resolution, in the sense that one of my friends, clients, she was watching, well, she hadn't watched our episode yet on rain, and she was like, it hasn't rained here. Like, what do I do? And I'm like, go outside and feel yourself and
Yeah,
feel
good.
the rain, like feel the nature. And within a few minutes, it started raining for the first time in a very long time. And she was like, oh gosh.
Yeah, we did. So at goldenmean.info/rain, you can see rituals we did, and you can see the labyrinth building, which is implosion, make a magnetic map, make a magnetic flower, make a long wave magnetic line, goldenmean.info/labyrinth. And we did that here in France, and we did have some luck making rain. But we also had the local shaman who knows all the local dragons by name. It was wonderful. That's Jan Lipnik, actually. So yeah, call the dragons. That's another part of the recipe.
Amazing. And when you're calling the dragons, that's calling the dragon lines, calling the lines.
Yeah, but the dragon current, the dragon lines, there are actually living dragon currents as well. And
Spirits.
if you read Dragon in the Ice Castle by my old friend David Yarrow, you can actually see those long magnetic lines at certain points. They will come out of the earth. The dragon is in the ice castle, and suddenly the castle is no longer ice. So when the dragon currents come alive, but remember that the giant elemental forces believe that we are drunk because we don't call them. It's that simple, because the elemental forces are the forces of fertility, quite literally. So when we say longitudinal magnetic currents, we can prove that's why a seed germinates. But did we know that longitudinal magnetic coherent had a name?
Mm-hmm.
The locals knew the names of the dragon currents. Hello, they were self-aware. Hello, they wanted respect.
Yeah.
That's the
Oh.
happily ever after, I hope.
Yeah. Well, I think remembering what to do, I think that place of disempowerment is where people get stopped up, where it's like, oh, what can I do? And it's like, wow, you can do a lot, actually.
Yeah, when the fire was approaching that village in Brazil, and the teacher took the kids out, and they literally made a quartz crystal spiral, a little quartz crystal circle, and within minutes, a rainstorm arrived and saved that village from a firestorm. It's a true story in the film of the teacher telling the story, goldenmean.info/rain. You can take your kids and you can do it. It's amazing.
Yeah.
So on that note of the happily ever after.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for this. This has been another awesome conversation.
I think we had the fun, and I think it was the twinkle in your eyes that did it, actually, but that's just my opinion.
Always appreciate that. But you still have that. Oh my gosh, it's growing by every day.
And thanks for bringing back the story from Eyrie-land. I really think Eyrie, I was raised on Lake Erie, and only later did I realize it was Lake Eyrie, and Eyrie is a nest for eagles. So I think you came back from Eyrie-land with the return of the bird tribe.
Yeah, I think so. It was just amazing. I mean, I'm obviously been doing this work, and I'm, pretty open, but I was still gobsmacked by by like the fact these ancestors like found me through time. I'm just like, wow, okay, this is way even more powerful. Like, they're seeking us as much as we're seeking them.
Exactly. It's such a beautiful, and that you were open to that and had the skill and training and background and opportunity. What a blessing. Congratulations, Bridget.
Thank you, Dan.
It's been fun.
Yes.
More to come. To be
Yes.
continued. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
With love. Bye-bye. Bye.